Hi everyone, I'm Victoria, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a video that I've been really looking forward to doing, which is my favourite books of the year. I need to do a little bit of admin before we get into the video. I do apologise for not posting one last week. I do try to post a video every Sunday. As you can probably hear from my voice, I've had a really horrible cold, cough, flu thing for the last week. If you follow me on Instagram, which I will leave linked below, you'll know that I did actually try to record a video on Sunday, but it was literally just me coughing and spluttering. My voice was going, it was dreadful, so I gave up. So the video that I was going to do last week was the end of the year tag, but we'll put that to one side for this year because clearly it wasn't meant to be. So I am feeling much better, but as you can hear I'm still a little bit chesty, so I do apologise if I cough through this, and I've actually got a glass of water just in case. But today's video, as I said, is going to be my favourite reads of the year. These aren't necessarily books that came out in 2018, although some of them are. They're just the books that I enjoyed the most when I read them this year. The only way I really struggled with how to choose my favourites because I've read nearly 80 books this year, so there have been some real crackers in there, obviously. So what I've done is basically I picked my favourite read from each month, so I've got 12 books to talk about. And they are my favourite from each month. I said in my previous video where I did my most disappointing reads that one of the quickest ways for a book to leave my house is if I don't like it, but having just gathered all the books for this video, I've realised that actually if I love a book it's also likely to leave my house quickly, but for a positive reason, which is because I have lent it to somebody because I know they will like it. See, I told you. So I don't have all of the physical books here, but I will leave a list below of everything that I'm talking about. And we should probably crack on because I've obviously got 12 books to talk about, one for each month. So, January. So the book that I read, my favourite read from January, was an author that I've never read before. And when I say that to people, they're always really shocked because I'm a massive reader. This is one of the most prolific authors I think probably ever. And I hadn't read one of their books, and one of the reasons was that I was slightly intimidated, didn't really know where to start, but my best friend Steph, this is one of her favourite books, and she kept saying to me, you've got to read it, you've got to read it. So mostly just to shut her up, I read it, and I absolutely adored it, and that book is Misery by Stephen King. Now, I'm sure this is a really well-known book, so I probably don't need to explain it, but for those of you that don't know, it's the story of an author who crashes his car in the snow, and when he comes around, he's in this woman's house, and she is looking after him, and things get seriously twisted from that point. Like I said, I hadn't read a Stephen King before. This is my very first one. I absolutely loved it. I've seen the film with Kathy Bates. Well, I say I've seen it, I've watched most of it like this, because I'm a total wimp for films like that. So I kind of knew what was going on, what was going to happen, but man, I did not expect to be so gripped. I think I read it in like 2 or 3 sittings, and I've been thinking about it since, and what's so clever is there's only 2 characters. I mean, there's sorry. I mean, there's the odd person that like comes to the front door or whatever, but in terms of actual characters that we get to know, it's just the 2 of them. And that's what's so clever about it, because you've only got 2 characters, and it's really tense. It was one of those books, like I said, I read it in 2 or 3 sittings, and every time I'd get up from reading it, like my muscles were sore because I'd been tensing, and I just, yeah, I like, especially the last like 50 pages, my heart was racing, and I just, yeah, really, really good. And I think it's a good wintry read as well. I don't tend to read seasonally, as you'll see from some of these books that I've read during the year. But this one is a good one for winter, and I would very much recommend it. In February, I read The Disappearances by Emily Bain Murphy. Now, I had really low expectation of this because it's kind of a magical realism type book, which is not usually my genre. Probably the best way for me to describe it is just to read you the back, which says, every 7 years something disappears in the remote town of Stirling. People's reflections, the stars in the sky, the ability to dream. Isla realises that her mother may be to blame for the curse, but some mysteries are buried very deep and some secrets want to stay hidden. And one young let's try that again. And one young woman's desire to uncover the truth may not be enough to save the people of Stirling from the past. A beautifully told story of loss, love, and finding the truth, no matter how difficult that may be. This was just gorgeous. I mean, first of all, look at the cover with the embroidery, and it's lovely. But the writing as well was really hypnotic. I read it very quickly, and yeah, I just adored it. So if you're looking for something a little bit different, it is a mystery, sort of a thriller, would highly recommend this. It was beautiful. Right, March. So in March I read a children's book. So my stepson Charlie is 9, and I try to read what he's reading at school so that we can talk about it at home. At some point I'm going to make a step parenting, like 101 type video, and talk about step parenting in more detail. But one of the things that I found has helped mine and Charlie's relationship is books and talking about books, because obviously that's one of my interests. So I've tried to read along with what he's reading, and in March they were reading The Firework Maker's Daughter by Philip Pullman. It's a really tiny book, obviously it's like not even middle grade, I don't think. It's 130 pages. I read it in about an hour and a half, which Charlie was amazed by. And it was really good. It's a very simple story about a little girl called Lila who wants to be a firework maker. She has to go on this adventure to basically prove her worth, and I loved it. It was really empowering. It was great to have a female protagonist who goes on this massive adventure, and along the way people are telling her that she can't do it because she's a girl, and I just love the message in it. I'm a massive fan of Pullman's work anyway, but I've never really read any of his younger stories, so I was really impressed by this, and it created some really good conversations between Charlie and I over, you know, what girls do, what boys do, and why it doesn't matter. Whether you're a boy or a girl, you can do whatever you like. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. It was just a really fun little story. There's you know, for 130 pages he packs loads of adventure in, and yeah, just adored it. So that was my favourite March read. In April, I read a book that has been massively hyped absolutely everywhere, and I generally avoid those books because I usually find them to be a letdown. But in March and April this year I was really unwell, and so I had a lot of time in bed having to rest, which doesn't sit very well with me, so I did a lot of reading. And so somebody bought me this book, a friend of mine bought me this book, sent it to me and said, look, try it, you know, I think you'll really like it. So I did, and I adored it. It's probably, if I had to pick my top 3 books of the year, this would be in that list. And it is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I'm sure you've heard what this book is about because it's been literally everywhere. I mean, it won the Costa Book Award last year, but it's basically about Eleanor and her life, and she lives a life that's very much the same every day, which is deliberate, and she kind of keeps herself away from other people, and then she basically meets somebody and her life starts to change. And I thought it was just a really interesting look at how people are treated that aren't that don't behave the same way as everybody else. She's also, there's a reason why she's holding herself apart from everybody else. I absolutely fell in love with her as a character. I was cheering her on all the way, and I came out of it just feeling it was heartwarming, but also like really more aware of how I talk to other people and how words have meaning and power. And I thought it was lovely, and I think everybody should be reading this. If you're one of these people, the few people left that haven't read it, please read it. The style is a little bit odd because Eleanor is a little bit odd, but once you get into it, it's so worthwhile, and I would definitely recommend. Right, May. Oh, okay, this is one of the books that I don't have with me because I've already sent it out into the world and said to my friend, read this. So this year I've read 3 books by this author. I've read 2, I'm just finishing a third, and that author is Roxane. I read one of her books last year and then immediately added basically all of her others to my TBR, which is very unusual for me to do, but I just had a feeling that I was going to love her writing. And my favourite May book was her novel, which is An Untamed State. I wish I had the knowledge to be able to put a picture here of it, but I'm sure you've seen the cover and I'll link it below. So this is a fiction book. It's the only fiction book of hers that I'm aware of, but I might be wrong. It's the only fiction one of hers I've read. and it tells the story of a woman who goes back to her hometown and is kidnapped and held for ransom. And it's one of those books that was incredibly difficult to read. It needs a warning on it for violence, for sexual violence, for it's very graphic. I found it really tough to read, but it felt like one of those books that was really important to read, and I couldn't look away. I think that's what I put on my GoodReads review, which I always, as soon as I read a book, I immediately put a comment on GoodReads so that I can kind of capture how I feel about that book as soon as I finished it. And I think that's what I wrote. I couldn't look away. So I would very much recommend that. It was very powerful. Roxane Gay's writing is amazing. Whether or not you agree with her views or not is entirely different. But the way that she writes is so powerful, and yeah, can't recommend that enough. Right, what was next? June. Okay, this is another one that I don't have a copy for. I sent it to my friend Steph. I don't think she's read it yet, and I'm going to have to beat around the head with it because she really should be reading it because it was amazing. Again, if I had to pick my top 3 books, this would probably be in the top 3. It might even be at number 1. And that book is The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. I read this in June, so I read it in the height of summer, which was probably a bit of a weird choice because it's a gothic thriller. It's not quite a horror. It's probably like I'll probably reread it this year, and I'll probably reread it towards the start. Next year, 2019. And I'll probably read it towards the start of the year because I think if I read it when like the nights are drawing in, and it's like cold and misty, I think that would go well with it. But I read it in June, absolutely adored it. Read it in one go. And for me, that's highly unusual. It's unusual for me to have the time, but clearly I did in June. But I read it in one sitting. I actually stayed up until 2 in the morning to finish it. So the story is of a young woman. She's been recently married and her husband has then died. It's set, I don't think it's specific on the setting, but it feels like kind of Georgian, Edwardian kind of setting. And she is pregnant. So she gets sent to her husband's estate in the country to basically rest, try to deal with her grief and get ready for the arrival of her baby. And when she gets there, she finds that there's a few staff members around. It's a very cold and slightly disused house. It's not been aired out or decorated or anything. It's very cold and gloomy, very atmospheric. And they have what they call inside the house. She finds it in the attic. She finds a collection of what they call silent companions, which are wooden figures that are carved to look as though they're alive. I'm not going to say any more than that, really. I think that's probably all you need to know. But basically, things start happening and it gets really creepy. And for me, the power of this book was how slowly the tension is built. It's done so gradually that it's only in the last 50, 60 pages that you suddenly realise how terrified you are. When I finished reading this book, my heart was beating out of my chest. It's so clever. I'm really looking forward to rereading it again in 2019 because I want to kind of see how the bits fit together, because it's one of those books where you get to the end and you're like, wow, how did the author get me here? So I'd be really interested to reread it again. So yeah, very creepy. Today I'm about to start reading The Woman in Black, which I've never read before. But I've seen the stage show of that and the film, and The Silent Companions very much reminded me of that, and that kind of tense, gothic, creepy, but slow burn thriller. So yeah, massively recommend that. I absolutely loved it. So July, I read Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Again, this has been everywhere. I think it came out 2017. It's been all over the internet, all over everywhere, won loads of awards, which it should have. It was amazing. But the basic storyline is it's set in a post-apocalyptic world where 95% of the human population have died, and we follow a few different characters, but mostly we follow a troupe of actors who are putting on Shakespeare plays. I had such low expectations of this. I'm not really into post-apocalyptic novels. Again, this was sent to me whilst I was poorly, and it sat on my shelf for ages before I picked it up and read it. And then I read it and I thought, why didn't I read this sooner? Because it's so clever, and actually I came away from it. The main kind of message in it is what is important to humanity? What makes us human? Is it that basic, once we've got the basic need for survival, so we've got food and water and shelter, what is it that's important? And there's a few different characters that we follow, a few different perspectives. It moves back and forth in time from before the epidemic and after, which is always interesting to read. But for me, the interesting bit was that what should we keep as humans? What should we keep and what should we discard? Should it be religion? Should it be creativity? Should it be the plays of Shakespeare? And yeah, it is a survival story in some ways, but mostly to me the message was, you know, about humanity and what makes us human, and I just absolutely loved it. And again, I will probably reread this at some point in 2019. Right, August, I don't read a lot of non-fiction. One of my goals for next year is to read more non-fiction. And in August, I read a non-fiction book that had been on my list for a while, and that was The Girl with Seven Names, Escape from North Korea. And I apologise because I'm sure I'm about to butcher the author's name. I think it's Hyeonseo. Sorry. So this, as you can guess from the title, is about a girl that escaped from North Korea. It's all about what happened to her, why she escaped. She didn't leave until she was in her teens, and so she's got really good memories of what it was like to grow up within that regime. So she talks about what that was like. She talks about why she came to, you know, what led her to want to leave, and then how she escaped and how she got out. And it was something that took her years and years to manage, and her journey was massive. And I read it, and it was fascinating, because obviously North Korea is not somewhere we know very much about, so I found that so interesting. I also found it really interesting, like terrifying and frustrating, how difficult it was for her to get away, and then the reception that she got when she did finally escape was shocking, because as a North Korean she's kind of seen as like the lowest of the low, and the racism that she experienced was shocking. But most of all, I kind of came away from it just thinking, this woman's incredible. Her writing is beautiful. For somebody whose first language is not English, it's incredible. It's really lyrical, and she manages to make what's actually horrific into a really beautiful lyrical prose. And I had to keep reminding myself as I was reading it that this actually happened to her. And it's one of those books that people, I think, I've lent this to so many people since I finished reading it. My husband's just started reading it, as you can see from the bookmark. And it's just one of those books I think everybody should read, and I thought it was fascinating. Right, September. Oh, I loved this book. So this is an author I'd read before, but it's a complete genre switch from the books that I've read from her previously, so I was really intrigued. And that book is The Wonder by Emma Donaghue. And look at this beautiful paperback. I mean, some of the gilt has come off because it's, you know, been in my bag and my hand a lot whilst I was reading it, although I read it really quickly. And it's beautiful. Look at that, I don't think. Oh, on the back as well. So I read Room by Emma Donaghue a while ago, and then saw this, and this is completely different. Excuse me. It's historical fiction. It's basically about an English nurse who is sent to Ireland because a girl is claiming that she hasn't had any food for 3 months and she's thriving, and so the nurse is kind of sent in as a skeptic to watch over her and find out what's going on. And I absolutely devoured this. I read it really fast. For me, the sign that I'm enjoying a book is it disappears really quickly, because I just can't put it down. And this was one of those. I found it really, the writing was really hypnotic. It was lyrical, it was so interesting. The character of the nurse, Lib, is very flawed. She doesn't make great decisions all the time. She's quite prejudiced against the people that she's spending time with, and she has a lot of opinions on them. And I really enjoyed it, and I also loved the kind of the journey that the character goes on from the start to the finish. She ends up as a completely different person in a completely different situation. There is a little bit of romance in it too, which I didn't mind. And overall I just thought it was beautiful, so I would recommend that. Then in October I read another book that I don't have the copy of here, I lent it to my mother-in-law, which was Wilde About the Girl by Louise Pentland. Louise is I'm sure you've heard of her, she's a YouTuber, and she wrote her first book, Wilde Like Me, last year, which I read. I liked it, it was okay. It's women's fiction, and tells the story of Robin Wilde, who's the main character, and you know, it was kind of okay. It's in like Bridget Jones vibes, which I'm all here for, but it felt very much like the first book, which obviously it was. So when the second book came out, I didn't rush out and buy it, but I did want to read it. And then I picked up a copy eventually, and oh man, it's so good. It's really fun, it's lovely, the way it's written is beautiful. It feels like a hug in a book, which sometimes you just need, and I loved it. But underneath that there's also some real grit to it and some real like backbone to the storytelling. There's a storyline that's really sad, that I'm obviously not going to spoil, which has been handled brilliantly by the author. There's also talk about kind of depression and anxiety and all that kind of thing. There is romance in it, but it's very empowering, and I love it. I love Robin Wilde. I really hope there are more books. Louise hasn't said yet, but hopefully there will be. I will definitely be reading more of her writing. And it was unexpected. It was an unexpected favourite, and I love it when a book does that. So yeah, recommended. Next is a book for November, so I've only got 2 left, so we're nearly done. Is a book that I've already raved about in my wrap up, so you can go there and see that. And that is Circe by Madaline Miller. This is also in my top 3 books of the year for sure. I adored this, and I know it's not for everybody. It's very character driven. It's the story of Circe, who was a Greek goddess, and what happened to her. And I've already talked about this loads, so go and see my other videos. But this and this beautiful book, I mean, I also have like shown the cover of this loads. Definitely one of my top reads of the year. I've also got her first book on my bookshelf to read up there, The Song of Achilles, which I'll be reading soon, and I'm very excited about that. But this, one of my books of the year. I've also given it as a Christmas present to 2 different people, which shows you how much I loved it. And then finally is a book that will also be in my December wrap up at the start of January, which is the second in a trilogy. I read the first one earlier in the year, gave it 4 stars. This one was a definite 5-star read for me, which is always surprising for a book, the middle book of a trilogy. And that is The Girl in the Tower by Katherine Arden. I will talk about this more in my December wrap up, but this is, as I said, the second book in a trilogy. It's set in Russia. It's all about magic, witchcraft, female empowerment. I adored it. Highly recommended. Those are all my books. I've been talking for 22 minutes, so I will wrap this up here. Please have a chat with me in the comments. What were your favourite books of this year? Those were mine. I'm so excited about next year's reading. My video next week will be my kind of 2019 goals. It's kind of goals. I don't really like setting goals, but that's what I'm going to talk about as my kind of my plans for next year. So please have a chat with me in the comments. I will leave all of my social media links and stuff down below. I will also put a list of all the books that I've talked about. Hope you enjoy this video, and I will see you next time. Bye!